This is an excerpt of a recent Power Up webinar called Ask Larry Anything. Hi, my name is Larry Jordan. Let's turn our attention now to video scopes and color correction and color grading, because scopes are at the heart of being able to interpret your image. There are 4 scopes inside Premiere and Final Cut, and DaVinci Resolve for that matter. There's the waveform monitor, the vectorscope, the RGB parade, the RGB overlay, and the histogram. The waveform monitor tells us everything we need to know about grayscale values, but tells us nothing about color. The vectorscope tells us everything we need to know about color, but tells us nothing about grayscale values. So, at a minimum, we need to use both the waveform monitor and the vectorscope at the same time to be able to properly interpret our image. The RGB overlay and its cousin, the RGB parade, displays the red, green, and blue color channels. It's available for both the waveform monitor and the histogram. The histogram displays the pixel distribution from dark to light. This is exactly like the histogram inside Photoshop. In Photoshop, it's essential. In video, much less necessary, because the waveform monitor gives us the same information, plus a whole lot more. If we take a look at the waveform monitor, and this is a scope from Premiere, but it works the same inside Final Cut, there are 7 grayscale ranges inside a standard dynamic range image. There's super white, which is levels over 100%, white, which are levels at 100%, highlights between 66 and 100%, midtones between about 33 and 66%, shadows between 0 and 33%. Black are video levels at exactly 0, and super black are levels below 0. When we look at the vectorscope, this is also from Premiere. I'll show you Final Cut in just a minute. The boxes show color targets at 100%, those are the big ones, and 75%, those are the smaller ones, of saturation. The diagonal line that's running up left, indicated by the top left arrow, represents the color of skin. What's interesting is our skin doesn't really have any color. It's the red blood under our skin that gives our skin color. Our skin is really just shades of gray. So we all have the same color red blood running under our skin, so we're all the same color, but we're not the same grayscale and we're not the same saturation. So that diagonal line represents the color of red blood under skin. Pure gray, indicated by the lower right arrow, is at the dead center of the vectorscope. Every shade of gray, and I'll illustrate this to you in just a minute, every shade of gray is a single dot in the center of the vectorscope. The vectorscope tells us 2 things. The hue of the color. Notice we start with red at 11:30 and magenta at 1:30 and blue at 3:30 and cyan at 5:30. Green at 7 o'clock, yellow at 9 o'clock, and we're back to red. As the angle around the vectorscope changes, the hue, shade of color, changes. The amount of color, the saturation, is dependent upon how far out the color measures from the center. And the brightness of the color is measured by the waveform monitor, which is why we have to use the 2 scopes. Let me show you how this works in real life. Here, for instance, is a gradient that I created inside Photoshop. On the left is pure white, on the right is pure black, and every shade of gray, from pure white to pure black, is between the 2. We can see that in the vectorscope, which is this scope here in the middle. There we go, right there. There's pure white on the left, there's midtones, and there's pure black on the right. The vectorscope is over here, and as you can see, every shade of gray is a single dot in the center. We can control which scopes we see by going to the View menu. I can see a single scope, or I can see 2 stack scopes, which in this alignment doesn't make any sense, or 2 side-by-side scopes, which I use a lot. We can even see 4 scopes, should we want to. And there is the histogram. And there's the RGB parade. I want to go back to 2 scopes because I'm not going to use the histogram today nor the parade scope, so we'll just look at these 2. One of the nice things that we can do about the waveform monitor is I can make statements saying the left side of the image is brighter than the center, and the center is brighter than the right side. I can make left and right statements by looking at the image, but I can't make up and down statements. Up and down on the waveform monitor represents brightness, where white is near the top and black is near the bottom. I have these little lines that I can draw out from the top, which allow me to set a level and take a look specifically at a number to define where something is. Look at the waveform monitor. Here's our 100% target for red and magenta and blue and cyan and green and yellow. But again, because I'm looking at a pure black and white picture, there's nothing to look at on the vectorscope. But it changes if I switch to an image which has color in it. Notice the vectorscope says I've got a clump of yellow, I've got a clump of red, I've got a clump of blue, but they're not really deeply saturated, maybe about 20%. On the waveform, I can see I've got something dark on the right, something not quite as dark on the left, and something quite bright, but not really bright, goes up to about 75% in the center. But as I look at both these scopes, I can't make a content decision. I can't look at the scope and say, oh, those are balloons, or triangles, or squares. I can't determine content by looking at the scope, but I can determine brightness, I can determine hue, and I can determine saturation. Let's take a look at a daylight photo. Look at all the color in the vectorscope, how heavily saturated it is. This fall foliage in New England, just a little bit of blue peeking in from the sky, no green particularly, no magenta, but huge amounts of yellow and orange and red. But notice how hard it is to read the waveform monitor. Here we have a setting we can adjust. If we go up to the View menu and go down to this slider, if I pull this slider down, I can decrease the amount that we see in the scope so I can start to see the detail that I like here and here, as opposed to having it be totally blotted out. So I run the View menu about, 25% for the scopes to make the traces easier to see. Here's another example. Not a whole lot of highlights. There's nothing very bright here. It ends about 75%. Shadows are a little high, ending about 6%. If we grab this and drag it down, we can use this to measure. Yep, around 6 and around 75. Drag up to get rid of it. Notice I've got a huge line going down. This is the blue in the sky. Sky blue is not actually blue. It's more of a cross between blue and cyan, as you can see here. A little bit of yellow-green from the plants, but look how desaturated all of that is. On the other hand, a night scene, which you would expect to be dark, there's the dark river right here. There's the dark sky, that arc right there. But look at how bright all the artificial lights are and all the buildings and street lights and reflecting off the river. Those go all the way up to 100%. The big difference between daytime and nighttime is all speculars, small lights. Daytime is light from all over. Nighttime just has regions of light. And look at the saturation. I've got a strong saturated spike in blue and orange and yellow, in a way that I don't have with the daytime scene. We would consider this woman to be white, but she isn't white. Her sweater is white, and there's her sweater right up here, near 95%. And her top is black. There's her top right down here. But she herself is not white and is not black. She's a mid-tone gray, right around 60%. What's especially interesting, though, is look where her skin is. There's only 3 colors. I've got the blue sky through the trees, I've got the green grass, and I've got her skin, and her skin is right on the skin tone line. Here's another example. Look at where her skin is, right on the skin tone line. Shadows down around, 5. That's her hair. There's the gray walls behind her. There's her white top. And there's her face. Even if I switch to a different group, right on the skin tone line, look at that. There's the white of her jacket, and her face is down here around 30%. But it's the same color, just not the same amount of brightness, not the same amount of saturation. The way we use scopes is we use the waveform monitor to tell us about the grayscale value in an image. And we use the vectorscope to tell us about the color, hue, and saturation of an image. This was an excerpt of a recent Power Up webinar called Ask Larry Anything. For the complete version of this online training, please visit my store at larryjordan.com/store and look for Webinar 343. By the way, when you need to stretch your training dollars, membership in our video training library saves you money and time. You can access all our videos for a low monthly price of only $19.99. That's almost 2,000 movies, hundreds of hours, on a wide variety of subjects. Plus, premium members can download practice media and projects. Our training covers a variety of software. We update it multiple times each month, and for more information, visit larryjordan.com/membership. And thanks.